Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, I continue my series on Cyberpunk Red by talking about the setting of the game. Now, this is going to be talking about the global setting. Next week, I'm going to talk about Night City in particular. But this week, I'm, as I said, going to talk about the global setting. The both on and off planet. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the time of the Red. The future of Cyberpunk is a dystopian setting. Let's first take a look at the state of the world, starting with the state of the U.S. The U.S. is pretty much a failed state. The President, Elizabeth Kress, has pretty much been in office for about 20 years at this point. The Constitution has been suspended and no elections are going to happen in the foreseeable future. In fact, Elizabeth Kress nationalized the Corp Militech to handle the security of the U.S. The U.S. has pretty much lost a good chunk of the Midwest and West Coast to being free states. Many of these have been taken over by the Corps to one degree or another. The most notable, of course, being the free city of Night City. But Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Northern California, and parts of British Columbia have become the Pacifica Confederation. North of the Pacifica Confederation, the Corp Biotechnica has been releasing free-range animal and plant experimental bioengineered creations. And overall, just kind of keeping everything in a sort of uneasy, balanced state has been the effective goal of current President Kress. The rest of the world isn't in much better a shape. In the 90s, there were a series of massive nuclear disasters with nuclear power in Libya, Iran, Chad, and the Arab Emirates, leaving most of these areas effectively as glassy craters, with only Egypt, Syria, and Israel still existing in some form. Of course, with Chew 2 being developed, there's not much need of oil, so no one really put any pressure on revitalizing this area. Until recently, when it's a case of, let's see what we can find here and make use of whatever we can get our hands on. Russia has kind of gone into a neo-Soviet phase. The reforms from the 90s ultimately ended up failing, and the Fourth Corporate War was pretty much the nail in the coffin. Nothing could really help them get back on their feet economically from the former time as the Soviet Union, and so Russia is seeing a rise in Soviet-style oligarchs. Europe, or the Euro Theater, as it's called, has, well, it was battered by the war and the loss of its European Stock Exchange, and orbital colonies. But to some extent, the whole European Union idea has helped, since you have a shared economy, except with Italy, Spain, and Greece, who are all in the middle of violent uprisings. The European Union created a stable economy in which all the member states were participating, which has helped Europe to an extent. However, Europe was still hit hard by the corporate war, even though it's over 20 years ago. They're still in the process of rebuilding. Central and South America were basically hit by waves of nationalistic sentiment during the war, and this resulted in them throwing off the corporate control of them that had been since the South American Wars. Asia is, well, Asia. Arasaka had tried to execute a coup and failed. China is still recovering from the biological terror attack that destroyed Hong Kong. And, of course, the battles in the South China Sea and the Mongolian Plateau for access to strategic resources left the government kind of, well, tired out. Now, Africa is a whole nother story. In Africa, with the Mount Kilimanjaro space elevator and other similar things, Africa's become a futurist dream. It is a place where high tech is readily available, since it has ready access, thanks to the Mount Kilimanjaro space elevator, to orbitally manufactured materials, such as orbital titanium and such. And so, Africa is probably the place that's coming out of the time of the Red in the best shape. Now, something else that's happened is there were various oil rigs and floating economic platforms out in the oceans of the world. Many of those have declared themselves independent and are commonly called the drift nations. And then, about the middle of the Fourth Corporate War, were called the High Riders. Basically, the people on Moon and in the O'Neill cylinders and various space colony-like structures. Because, yes, Cyberpunk has that. Decided they didn't want to be bossed around by the Earth. So they got mass drivers and Delta rockets, the rockets that change the course of asteroids, and dropped some big rocks on Earth. It's basically their way of going, we don't want to be ruled by you anymore. And, yep, pretty much everyone accepted that because, well, the High Riders had the capability to do an extinction level event on humanity. And were potentially willing to go that far. So, they were unanimously recognized as a sovereign nation called the High Rider Confederation. And with regards to corporations, there was a big change that happened. The corporations have to select someone to be their face. The face of the corporation is the person legally responsible for all the actions of the corporation. What this means is the face, usually the CEO of the corporation, has a vested interest in making sure everything is above board. What this means is if the face of the corporation finds out something is happening, whether they're responsible for it or not, legally they're responsible. If a corp has people doing unethical science experiments, the face of the corp might find themselves given a lengthy prison term. If, however, they cause massive death through, say, criminal negligence, well, the death penalty applies. And yes, that does mean high-ranking execs who are the face of their company can be executed if their company does something that normally the perpetrators would get the death penalty for. There is no more ducking the responsibility. The buck stops with the face of the company, who, as I mentioned, is often the CEO. And that is the overall look at the Time of the Red. By the way, why is it called the Time of the Red? Well, the asteroid impacts caused from the 7-hour war that the High Rider Confederation launched at Earth to get their independence, combined with the at least one nuke, the one put in the Arasaka Towers in Night City, and maybe more, gave the sky a hazy red hue for a couple years. And even now, 22 years after the bombs went off in Arasaka Tower, there are still beautiful red sunrises and sunsets. So, it's called the Time of the Red. Next week, I will talk about Night City and the various daily economic concerns of the typical person within Night City, or pretty much anywhere in the world. Until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.